Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep into something that I think a lot of people have been talking about lately. Why are fewer people getting married these days? There's so much to unpack and so many different perspectives to look at. But I was actually blown away by one stat in particular. It now costs over $300,000 to raise a child to age 18.
Oh,
More than double what it cost just 30 years ago.
yeah, it's
It's
crazy.
a lot of money, so it's understandable that some people are kind of rethinking that whole marriage and family situation.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's not even just about, personal choices, things like that. This trend is having ripple effects all over the place.
Yeah.
Everything from the economy to the way our social structures are set up to even how we define success these days.
You're right. It's a much bigger picture.
So we're really going to go deep on this one.
Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so let's just start with the elephant in the room, the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know student loan debt is crippling so many young people.
Right.
Housing costs are insane. And the job market can feel so shaky.
Yeah, it's a lot to deal with. And if you're already feeling that squeeze financially, adding a wedding on top of that and then maybe kids, it's like, how does that even work?
I know, it's daunting.
It makes sense that people are putting the brakes on and saying, okay, wait, I need to figure out my own money situation before I start mixing it with someone else's.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I do, but only when I can afford to go on a nice honeymoon after.
Right. Exactly.
But really, though, have we seen this before in history? Times when the economy's kind of shaky and fewer people are getting married?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, think back to the Great Depression, for example.
Yeah.
Economic hardship always seems to make people hesitant about making these big life decisions, like marriage. It's a pattern we see over and over again.
That's really interesting. Okay, so something that really surprised me in the research was, we always talk about how women's economic independence has really changed things.
So for sure.
Which it totally has. But it also made me think about, what about the expectations on men? Have those shifted too?
That's such a good point. I feel like we're in this weird in-between phase. The old model of marriage where the husband is the main breadwinner. That doesn't really fit anymore.
No, not at all.
But we haven't quite figured out what the new one looks like.
Yeah.
There's more pressure on men now to be really involved dads and help out more at home, which is great. But our society hasn't really caught up in terms of support.
Yeah.
Paternity leave is still pretty limited in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And affordable childcare. Good luck.
Seriously.
So for a lot of guys, taking that leap into family life can feel like jumping off a cliff without a parachute.
Yeah, they're like, hey, I'm totally down to be a modern dad, but can someone give me the tools to actually make it work?
Exactly.
Right.
And then on top of all of that, we're seeing this huge emphasis on individualism and personal fulfillment.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Everyone's like, before I can commit to we, I need to figure out me.
Totally. And that makes sense in a way. You need a solid foundation on your own before you can even think about building something with somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also feeding into this fear of losing your autonomy and your independence. People are delaying marriage because they're putting their personal goals and their professional goals first.
Yeah.
And they're worried about having to sacrifice their dreams for a relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like we're in this era of me first, then maybe we'll see about us. Which is interesting because it makes you wonder, could this focus on self-discovery actually lead to stronger relationships in the long run? If you take the time to figure things out on your own, maybe you're actually setting yourself up for a more successful partnership later on.
That's a really interesting question. It definitely makes you think maybe having that strong sense of self could actually lead to a healthier relationship.
Right.
But it also brings up this whole pressure cooker of expectations that we're all dealing with.
Right.
There's this timeline, right? Finish school, get a job, get married, buy a house, have kids, this checklist for success. And maybe it's overshadowing the importance of being actually ready for those big commitments.
You're right. That's a great point. Okay, so we've got economic anxieties, we've got shifting gender roles, we've got a generation that's kind of obsessed with finding themselves.
Yeah.
Where does technology fit into all of this? I mean, dating apps are a whole cultural phenomenon at this point. Are they helping or hurting when it comes to finding the one?
It's a total paradox. Technology, especially online dating, gives us this amazing ability to connect with people we never would have met otherwise. But it also throws us into this world of endless options, which can be both exciting and totally overwhelming.
It's like being a kid in a candy store. But the candy is potential partners. It sounds fun, but after a while, you just get a sugar rush and a stomach kick.
Exactly. You're constantly bombarded with choices. And that can lead to what some researchers call choice overload. You start second-guessing yourself.
Yeah.
Wondering if there's someone better out there just to swipe away. It's like the grass is always greener, syndrome on steroids. It messes with our expectations for everything. We're so used to getting what we want when we want it. Thanks, Amazon Prime.
But building a lasting relationship, it takes time and effort, and you have to be willing to work through challenges. It's not always that instant gratification.
Right. It's like we're so quick to swipe left on anything that seems even a little bit off instead of like actually taking the time to see if there's a real connection there.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, are we losing those important communication skills that you need to have a successful marriage? If you're more comfortable texting than actually talking to someone face to face, how do you deal with all those like inevitable bumps in the road that every couple's going to face? That's a really good point. Mm-hmm. While technology can be amazing for keeping us connected, it just can't replace that deep face-to-face interaction. All that body language and tone of voice, all those little subtle cues, they just get lost when you're communicating through a screen.
Totally. It's like trying to have a deep conversation using only emojis. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this shift away from traditional marriage.
Okay.
But it's not like people are giving up on relationships entirely.
Right. It's more like we're expanding our definition of what a good, fulfilling relationship can look like.
Yeah.
Living together before marriage is becoming way more common. And the stigma around it has really gone down. Plus, being single isn't seen as this, like, failure anymore.
Which makes me think, are we just redefining what success and happiness actually mean? Like, are those traditional milestones, marriage, house, kids, are they becoming less important?
Absolutely. Those old markers of making it don't have the same power they used to. Mm-hmm. People are making their own paths and defining success on their own terms. And that includes how they approach relationships. And I think that's great. It means we're moving away from this idea that there's only one way to be happy.
I like that. Choose your own adventure when it comes to relationships.
Exactly.
But wait, what about that whole till death do us part thing? Do you think that rising divorce rates play into why people are hesitant to get married in the first place?
I mean, divorce rates are definitely a factor. But here's a different way to think about it. Maybe those higher divorce rates show that people actually want more fulfilling relationships. They're less willing to stay in a marriage that's making them unhappy, just because of societal pressure or obligation. It's not necessarily about rejecting marriage. It's more about raising the bar for what makes a good partnership.
So it's not about settling for good enough anymore. It's about finding a relationship that truly brings joy and fulfillment.
I like that. Okay, but let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. The research points to some pretty serious economic consequences if marriage rates keep going down.
Yeah, that's definitely worth paying attention to. Traditionally, marriage and starting a family have been linked to economic growth. When people get married, they usually buy houses, have kids, invest in their future. All of that stimulates the economy. As those patterns change, it's going to have an effect on the whole economic landscape.
What about the demographic changes? Fewer marriages usually mean fewer children, which means we have an aging population, right? Doesn't it put a strain on things like Social Security and healthcare?
That's a major concern. An aging population can create challenges for the workforce and put more pressure on social safety nets. It's a complex issue with long-term implications that we need to be thinking about right now. Absolutely. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about social isolation. There's this idea out there that if marriage rates keep dropping, it's going to lead to a lonelier society. Is that something to worry about? Or are there other ways to combat loneliness?
Well, it's true that marriage and family create a built-in support system. But it's definitely not the only way to fight loneliness. We need to get creative about fostering community connections outside of traditional family structures.
So like what? Book clubs, bowling leagues, community gardens?
All of the above and more. It could be about strengthening community groups that already exist, creating new spaces for people to connect over shared interests, or even supporting intergenerational programs that bring people of different ages and backgrounds together. It's about recognizing that community can exist in so many different forms, and we need to cultivate those connections and make sure everyone feels like they belong.
That's such a great point. It doesn't matter if it's romantic relationships, friendships, or just being involved in your community. We're all hardwired for connection. It's about finding what works best for each of us and creating a society where everyone feels supported.
It's really interesting to think about how all these things we've talked about, the economy shifting, gender roles, technology that focus on personal fulfillment, they're all connected. It's not just about individual choices. It's a whole web of cultural, economic, and technological forces that are changing how we approach relationships and build our lives.
It's like this giant puzzle where every piece is moving at the same time. So where do we go from here? Is there any way to address these challenges without forcing everyone back into that traditional marriage model?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the good news is our sources actually offer some pretty interesting solutions. The biggest thing to remember, though, is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. We have to create a more flexible and supportive environment that recognizes and celebrates all the different ways people choose to live their lives.
So less one size fits all and more choose your own adventure when it comes to relationships and building a good life.
Exactly.
I'm all for that, but how do we actually make that happen?
One big thing our sources talk about is work-life balance. Employers and policymakers have a big responsibility to create family-friendly policies. Things like flexible work schedules, paid parental leave for both moms and dads, and affordable, high-quality childcare. Those are things that could really help ease the financial burden that makes marriage and family feel out of reach for so many people.
Those are some great practical steps. What about the more emotional and communication side of relationships? How can we teach people the skills they need to have healthy and lasting relationships, whether they get married or not?
That's where relationship education comes in. What if schools and community centers offer programs that taught young people those essential skills, like how to communicate, how to resolve conflicts, how to be emotionally intelligent, the building blocks of healthy relationships? It's like giving them a relationship toolkit instead of just throwing them out there and hoping for the best.
I like that. A relationship toolkit. Instead of just figuring it out as you go and learning from mistakes, they'd have some strategies and insights to help them navigate those ups and downs that are always going to come up in relationships.
Exactly. And it's not even just about romantic relationships. These skills are valuable for any kind of close connection, whether it's with friends, family members, or even coworkers.
It's about building those strong foundations for communication and understanding, no matter what kind of relationship it is. But here's another thing that comes to mind. What if marriage rates keep going down? What happens to that sense of community that marriage has traditionally provided? Can we find other ways to replace that?
I think we can. We have to start thinking outside that traditional marriage and family box when it comes to building a sense of community.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
It could be anything. Supporting local businesses, community gardens, volunteering at a soup kitchen, joining a hiking group,
So finding those ways to connect with people who have similar interests and values, whether it's through hobbies or volunteering or even just hanging out at your local coffee shop.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that human connection is a need that we all have. But the ways we meet that need are changing and becoming more diverse. We need a society that supports all those different forms of connection, whether it's traditional families, chosen families, or just really strong community ties.
This whole deep dive has been full of so many insights. We've busted some myths and looked at things from different angles. But I think what's really sticking with me is that we're not just watching these trends happen. We're all part of shaping the future of relationships and community.
I couldn't agree more. Every choice we make, every conversation we have, every action we take, it all adds to this bigger picture of human connection. It's a responsibility we all share.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. Instead of being afraid of what we don't know, what if we embraced all the possibilities? What if we saw this shift away from traditional marriage, not as some kind of failure, but as an opportunity to build something new and maybe even better?
I love that. What if this is our chance to really rethink what relationships are all about, to create more inclusive and supportive systems that actually meet the needs of our modern world?
Exactly. Instead of holding on to these outdated models, let's embrace the fact that there are so many different ways for people to connect and build their lives. Let's create a future where relationships are about love, respect, and genuine connection, no matter what label we put on them.
Let's create a world where everyone feels seen and heard and valued for who they are and how they choose to navigate all the beautiful and complex ways that humans can connect with each other.
That's a future I think we can all get behind. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.